Hello, my pretties. I would like to present a documentary about Gothic history, and I will do my best to be exhaustive about the eras and facets of culture. Music, visual art, sculpture, architecture, fashion, and literature. Here is a graph of all the eras that we will be talking about. I think it's interesting to see how big the length of time is where the Gothic people have existed in comparison with the cultural trends that use the same name after they cease to exist. Chapter 1: The People. This period lasts officially from the 2nd century to gradual disappearance into the 18th century. Let's start from the etymology. It's from the Proto-Germanic verb geuta, which means to pour. Where did these people come from? In prehistoric legends, it was said that they came from Scandinavia, from Gothaland. There is some evidence that they came from around the Baltics, where they distinguished themselves from the neighboring tribes in the 1st century AD for practicing inhumation, burying their departed without weapons beside them, and making stone circles. The first historians to ever write about them properly were the Greco-Romans in the 3rd century AD. They said that the Goths were a Germanic tribe living north of the Danube in what is now Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. Religion-wise, they followed Germanic paganism, but due to becoming Christians in the 4th century, there is not much evidence about the details. All we know is that the center of Gothic belief was tied to the village, tribe, or clan called Cuni. They had polytheism, they were worshipping nature and their ancestors. They believed in witches, for example Halirunai, which were similar to the Anglo-Saxon Helrune. Some historians connect the Germanic pagan trinity of gods, Vodanas, Divas, and Tunras, as equivalents to the Gothic god trinity Gaut, Thebes, and Fairgunais. Thebes was the god of war, for which they had a cult. This was the equivalent of the Romans' Mars. Fairgunais was presumed by the Romans to be Jupiter, but this is not confirmed historically. Some other gods are Tyr, which had a funny magical finger that would neutralize a person if he touched them with it, and Donaus, which was possibly a deified version of the Danube River. In the 3rd century, they began their conversion to Christianity, so they had their own Gothic Bible, which looks extremely beautiful, with dark red pages and gold writing. What about their alphabet? Here is a preview of the Gothic alphabet. It's mostly Greek origin characters written in a runic style. As for their appearance, they looked tall and athletic, with light skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. There was this Greek guy, Eunapius, who wrote about how big and buff they were, but in a hater sort of way. Their bodies provoked contempt in all who saw them, for they were far too big and far too heavy for their feet to carry them, and they were pinched in at the waist, just like those insects that Aristotle writes of. Alright, let's crack on with the arts, since art is the mirror of culture. There is no surviving evidence of music, paintings, or sculptures from this era, but there is some metalwork, the treasure of Guarazar. Luckily, we have some architecture from the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy. We have the Mausoleum of Theodoric, Basilica Sant'Apollinare Nuovo, Palace of Theodoric, and Church of San Juan Bautista. The last one being from Baños de Cerrato in Spain. Fashion. They wore tunics, trousers, and cloaks, often fastened with brooches, but there is not much information other than the one we know about general Germanic tribes. Writing. First of all, the Bible, which is so beautiful I am almost tempted to call it artwork. The Skeirains, meaning explanation, a fragmentary commentary on the Gospel of John. It's an original theological work in the Gothic language. There were all sorts of runic inscriptions on artifacts. Then there were the legal codes. They began to codify their cultural thinking into laws written in Latin. So there was the Code of Euric in 470s AD for the Visigoths in Spain, and the Edict of Theodoric in 500 AD for the Ostrogoths from Italy. I've always wondered, how did the Goths split into Ostrogoths and Visigoths? Well, to put it shortly, there were never a single Gothic kingdom to start with, but rather two main tribal confederations living together in the region north of the Black Sea, modern-day Ukraine and Romania. The Greutungi, that became the Ostrogoths, meaning Goths of the rising sun, they lived further east in the steppes, while the Tervingi, that became the Visigoths, meaning Western Goths or noble Goths, they lived further west near near the Danube River. They were sharing a common Gothic culture, language, and religion with minor differences. This was until they were torn apart by the massive Hunnic invasion of 376 AD that scattered their people into two halves, going into two different directions for the next 80 years. These directions were according to the way in which they chose to react to the invasion. One chose to fight and the other to submit. This led to the creation of two separate and powerful kingdoms in the ruins of the fallen Roman Empire. In 370s AD, the Huns first attacked, defeated, and slayed the king of the Grottungi or Ostrogoths. The surviving Ostrogoths were subjugated and forced to become the Huns' vassals for several generations. In 453 AD, after the death of Attila and the collapse of the Hunnic Empire, the Ostrogoths regained their independence. They eventually moved into the Balkans and, under their legendary king Theodoric the Great, were sent by the Eastern Roman Emperor to reclaim Italy. Terrified by the fate of their eastern cousins, the Tervingi or Visigoths made a desperate decision under the pressure of Hunnic invasion. In 376 AD, they petitioned the Roman Emperor Valens for permission to cross the Danube River and seek refuge inside the Roman Empire. They soon rebelled due to poor treatment and, in a stunning victory, defeated and killed Emperor Valens at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD. This battle is often seen as a pivotal moment in the decline of the Roman legions. They then wandered through the Balkans, even sacking Rome itself in 410 AD under their famous king Alaric. Finally, they settled in southwestern Gaul and later Hispania, modern Spain, Toledo, where they established a kingdom. Now about their downfall. In 493 AD, the Ostrogoths succeeded in their mission to conquer Italy and established their kingdom in Ravenna. This kingdom lasted until it was reconquered by the Eastern Roman Empire in the 6th century. The Visigoths, however, from where we left them last time in Spain, were conquered by the Umayyad Caliphate. All that remained of them was in two places: Asturias, which would go on to initiate the Reconquista in 711 AD, and in Crimea, where their culture and community survived for more than 1,000 years before integrating into other local cultures. Frankish author Walafrid Strabo wrote in the 800s that Gothic was still spoken within a related dialect known as Crimean Gothic. According to traveler records, this language was still spoken in Crimea until the 18th century. Chapter 2: The First Movement. The Medieval Goths, or the original Gothic era. This period takes place within the centuries of 12 to 16. The movement started due to a combination of theological, economic, and technological factors. Theologians had a philosophical basis for the new style, as they were focused on the concept of divine light. So they employed Gothic architecture because it was able to flood the interiors with light to create a more heavenly and transcendent space. Economically, cities became bigger and they needed bigger buildings to accommodate it. But also there was a rise in the new wealthy patron class that commissioned grand buildings and artwork. Technologically, they needed structural support for the newer size of the buildings, thus inventing the ribbed vault and the flying buttresses. Some of its innovations evolved from previous Romanesque architecture. As for the arts, there is still no surviving music to be found, and this will continue until the 20th century. Paintings and other visual arts. The stained glass windows from the Chartres Cathedral. It has over 180 windows with the famous Chartres blue glass, which served as the, quote, Bible for the illiterate because they depicted so many biblical scenes. The stained glass scenes from the Passion of Saint Vincent of Saragossa, an excellent example of narrative storytelling and rich color. The illuminated manuscripts Hours of Jean Devreux, created by Jean Pouchel. It exemplifies the intimate and graceful style of the early Gothic. The Parisian Psalter of St. Louis. It is a royal Bible with 78 full-page illuminations in tempera paint and gold leaf. The frescoes by the Elemunde master. They are well-preserved church wall paintings in the style of Biblia Paupernum, which means poor man's Bible. Sculpture. I want to start with my first honorable mention. Antoine, the ice-spitting gargoyle, summoner of blizzard. The sculptural program of Reims Cathedral, the jam statues on the west facade are famous for their classical-inspired calm smiles and naturalistic drapery. The sculptures at Bamberg Cathedral, which shows influence from the Reims one, it includes the famous Bamberg Rider, one of the first life-size equestrian statues since antiquity, and the Shrine of the Three Kings, a massive and elaborate gilded reliquary by Nicholas of Verdun, blending Romanesque majesty with early Gothic naturalism. As for metalwork, there is the Thorn Reliquary, Paris, France, a late Gothic court treasure made of gold, enamel, and precious stones displaying flamboyant elegance. Now architecture. Between 1140 and 44 AD, it is considered as the birth of the Gothic movement in architecture with the Saint Denis Basilica as its starter. The movement originated in France and it is characterized by architectural designs, pointed arches, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, which were revolutionary, allowing for taller buildings filled with light, emphasis on verticality and light as seen in cathedrals such as Notre Dame. For my second honorable mention, I have these cages that date back to 1536 and were used to display the bodies of three Anabaptist leaders who were T-Word and E-Word after the suppression of the Münster Rebellion, an attempt to establish a theocracy. The bodies remained in the cages for about 50 years as a warning to any future rebels. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, disclaimer, the original Gothic architecture will be the biggest art section of this documentary. Every building in this list is a miracle of the world. I am tempted to say that this is where human culture peaked. Stephansdom, the enduring stone heart of Vienna, a symbol of Habsburg piety and the city's resilient spirit through siege. Other than the Basilica of Saint Denis that I have mentioned, we have the Notre Dame de Paris, an iconic cathedral that pioneered the use of flying buttresses and features enormous rose windows. The Chartres Cathedral, France, mentioned in the sculpture chapter, a high Gothic masterpiece with a near-complete set of original stained glass windows. The Reims Cathedral, France, this is where French kings were crowned. It is famous for its sculptural programs and elegant window tracery. The Köln Cathedral, the largest Goth cathedral in Germany. It features immense twin towers and a soaring nave. The Milan Cathedral, the largest church in Italy. It demonstrates the elaborate vertical style of late Gothic architecture. The Westminster Abbey, which is the main Benedictine church in England. It has undergone numerous renovations over the centuries and certain parts are still there from the Gothic era, such as the choir area, prime example of English Gothic. Last but not least, Sainte-Chapelle, France. It was built to house holy relics. The walls are almost entirely made of stunning stained glass. Fashion. They used to wear a garment called cotehardie, a fitted short dress for men and women, often buttoned down the front. It was a shorter previous tunic version, showing more of the leg. The hupelande, a long voluminous outer gown with very full sleeves, often lined with fur, and a hide belt. Sleeves and edges were frequently dagged, which means cut into decorative shapes, pointed shoes of different lengths, tippets, which were long streamer-like extensions of sleeves, reticulated headdresses, which were complex women's headdresses involving metal wire cages and held together with braided hair, often forming a horned shape covered with veil. Party-colored clothing, nowadays we call this color blocking, a style where garments were made from two contrasting colors split down the middle, creating a bold, dramatic look. Writing. It was mostly religious in nature. Some French Gothic writings include the Bible Moralisée of St. Louis. This is the apocalypse at the ending, which I consider to be quite Gothic horror. The Psalter of St. Louis, Bedford Book of Hours. English Gothic writings are the Apocalypses, Bodleian Douce and Lambeth Apocalypses. The English medieval Goths really loved their psalters, so we have the Ramsey one, the Queen Mary one, the Luttrell one, and the Macclesfield psalters. There's the Holcomb Bible picture book. Well, that sounds fun for children, doesn't it? The Ellis Mere Chaucer, a collection of short fiction. The Winchester Mallory, a chronicle. Honorable mention, I found this excerpt from the Bible Sainte Geneviève from the Geneviève Library, which includes this cute black lion, which of course is very Gothic. Or this cute pair of bats from the workshop bestiary in 12th century England. Chapter 3: Survival. Between the 16th and the 18th centuries, historians considered that the style, even though it was still used but it was very rare, meant that it was in a state of survival. And that was through use in building universities and country houses. It's important to note that the term Gothic was originally a pejorative. It was coined during the Italian Renaissance to describe the architecture of the Middle Ages, which they considered barbaric and attributed to the Goths who destroyed the Roman Empire. The term has only lost its negative connotations and was embraced as a positive label during the 19th century revival. Speaking of which, Chapter 4: Revival or Neo-Gothic. From the 18th extending into the start of the 20th century, then disappearing into obscurity once more. This phase was largely influenced by Romanticism and the fascination with the medieval past, but different countries interpreted that differently. For example, the English linked it to nationalism as the style was seen as truly Christian, whatever that meant at the time. This movement coincided with the Catholic emancipation and an Anglican Oxford movement, which resulted in thousands of new churches being built, and so they needed an older style to use for them. For example, they have rebuilt the exterior of the Westminster Abbey in that era by using the Gothic Revival style. At the same time, ironically for the French, the Gothic Revival represented going back to pagan classic. I started reading this book and I find it brilliant, especially the context explanations in the intro. It's called Late Victorian Gothic Tales from Oxford World Classics, which I found in an Instagram post. Shout out to the Goth mother. Please go follow her, she is awesome. The book calls the Gothic culture as lowly, hybrid, barely controlled, comic, mannerist, and decadent. Quote, "It gears off into such numerous directions that sometimes they can be contradictory, so it is important to let the definition be generous rather than narrow. In the 18th century, it's almost as if it got a new definition. Gothic equaled the opposite of Western Europe: civilization, reason, and order. The Goths equal all the barbarians, northern tribes that swept south in the twilight of the Roman Empire and inaugurated the Dark Ages." Thomas Carlyle warned in The Signs of the Time from 1829 that not the external and the physical alone is now managed by machinery, but the internal and spiritual also. As the world was regulated and disenchanted by the routines of industrial life, the Gothic could take on a positive balance of everything that was being lost: passion, belief, spirit, individual eccentricity, and craft. Always remember, the dreamlike logic of the Gothic is likely to disarm any easy definition. And now the arts. Painting. The decadent refused bland middle-class commerce and became absorbed in an obscure, private, perverse world. It revels in artifice, it despises the natural and the virile. Its colors were the livid, the sulphurous yellows of forbidden French novels, or the bilious greens of the ruinous drink absinthe, all of the gamut of intensified colors corresponding to autumn and the setting of the sun, to overripe fruit and the last hours of civilization. Needless to say, fin de siècle theatrical drama was huge. They may have had a panic similar to the one we had in Y2K, as this book remembers a sense of being in the last hours of civilization, the sunset of mankind. Now to the actual paintings. Ernst Ferdinand Oehme, Cathedral in Winter, Procession in the Fog, and Meissen in Winter. He captures the German Gothic revival's spiritual core as his paintings masterfully fuse the sublime drama of Romanticism with the awe-inspiring scale of medieval architecture, depicting solitary cathedrals and abbeys shrouded in mist and moonlight to evoke a profound sense of spiritual melancholy. The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli, a proto-Gothic romantic painting that influenced the darker supernatural themes of the revival. Ophelia, a pre-Raphaelite masterpiece embodying the revival's fascination with Shakespearean and tragic medieval heroines. The Hireling Shepherd, while a pre-Raphaelite work, its medievalism and detailed style are a direct product of the Gothic revival sensibility. The Scapegoat, a highly symbolic and detailed religious painting reflecting the revival's interest in spiritual sincerity. The Lady of Shalott, a later pre-Raphaelite work that draws on Arthurian legend, a key source of the Gothic revival themes. Sculpture. Westminster Palace, the external sculptures, a vast program of statues of kings, queens, and saints restoring the encyclopedic facade of the Gothic cathedral to a parliament building. The Albert Memorial, the monument itself, is a masterpiece of high Victorian Gothic design surrounded by a frieze of 169 life-size figures of composers, poets, and artists. St. George's Church Leeds, rood screen. Pugin designed intricate metalwork, woodwork, and stone carvings for his buildings, reviving medieval liturgical art. Architecture. Strawberry Hill House, some say this building kick-started the Gothic revival. The Fonthill Abbey, a dramatic and extravagant, though ultimately collapsing Gothic fantasy house built for William Beckford. The Palace of Westminster that was mentioned in the sculpture group 2, it's an iconic example of Gothic revival for a public building. Köln Cathedral, the original medieval building, was finally completed based on the surviving 13th century plans, becoming a nationalistic project. Sainte Clotilde, one of the first major neo-Gothic churches in Paris. St. Patrick's Cathedral, the largest Gothic revival cathedral in the United States. St. Pancras Railway Station and Midland Grand Hotel, a spectacular example of applying Gothic grandeur to an industrial and commercial building. Trinity Church, America, a seminal example of the Gothic revival style for an Episcopal church in America. And Manchester Town Hall, a massive civic building in the Gothic revival style symbolizing Victorian civic pride. The style remained dominant for Catholic church construction in many parts of Europe until it began to be challenged by other styles around World War I. Fashion! They liked to wear leg of mutton sleeves, huge puffed sleeves inspired by 16th century fashion, creating a dramatic historical silhouette. Pointed bodices. These bodices are ending in the point at the front and wide off-the-shoulder necklines. Berthas, reminiscent of medieval gowns. Aesthetic or artistic dress trend. Basically, the whole point of the aesthetic movement back in the 19th century was to stop wearing restrictive, corseted clothing and opt for a more leisure style. It was led by figures like William Morris, and it inspired the pre-Raphaelite styles with flowing fabrics and medieval-inspired simplicity. Here is Oscar Wilde in his aesthetic lecturing costume. Gothic revival jewelry. It features natural motifs like flowers, snakes, and crosses, often in engraved gold or silver, inspired by medieval pieces. As a segue into the next fashion trend, there is mourning jewelry containing parts of the departed on it, so you can carry them on you wherever you go. The Victorian era also contributed to the aesthetic of mourning wear, popularized by Queen Victoria's prolonged wearing of black. She established herself as an archetype of the widow queen while keeping a 40-year widowhood. Needless to say, everyone started wearing all black. And not to be irreverent, but isn't it so that Queen Victoria invented the little black dress? Writing. The literary birth. The term was revived in 1764 by Horace Walpole with his novel The Castle of Otranto, subtitled A Gothic Story. Walpole was obsessed with Gothic architecture, even transforming his estate, the Strawberry Hill, I previously mentioned in the architecture chapter, into a Gothic revival building. The story established the genre's classic tropes: ancient castles, supernatural elements, and an atmosphere of mystery and terror. In late Victorian Gothic tales, we can find tropes that I can't help but see equivalents in today's culture of Goth and Halloween themes. Fascination with the paranormal, so much so that doctors were proud to add psychic to their list of titles after following some fashionable course about it. Please don't be shocked, many doctors even today follow pseudoscience fads too. They called telepathy occult transmissions, ghosts veridical hallucinations, and haunted houses phantasmogenetic centers. Psychical researchers created a massive amount of documentation, including if one could hypnotize at a distance, perhaps from across the English Channel. Some other fascinations at the time include decay, such as a castle fallen into disrepair, cursed aristocratic houses and their inheritances, buried wrongs or familial doom, spiteful ghosts of past ancestors, unhappy with the state in which they left the world, such as children ignorant about their history. From this trope, I believe we got the ghost hunting rituals of knowing the ghost's story in order to let it find peace in the afterlife. In the book Late Victorian Gothic Tales, it writes, "The haunted house or castle that embodies the passage of generations, an entrapment within the sins of a lineage. There is also inheritance in the more strictly biological sense, what residues of the primitive or the animalistic learn in the modern body and mind." After the passing of Charles Darwin, the optimist father of the theory of evolution, there began to spring many theories of the dark side of it. What if we could regress back and devolve in an animalistic werewolf, perhaps, or a degenerate vampire? Maybe the vampiric lore was even more linked to the Gothic being the opposite of the Western European culture. So, digging into medieval Eastern European lore from the Carpathians, for example, was preferred. Then there was reviving the dead by this newfangled electricity stuff that no one understood back then, such as the guy from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Electricity was considered mysterious and occult. Ancient burial sites, the Egyptian mummy craze caused by the discovery of King Ramses' tomb complex at the time. Many of these fears survive into the next wave of the 80s. Now let's talk actual books. I've mentioned The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. It was considered to be the very first Gothic novel. It's set in a haunted castle and it's established the genre's core tropes. The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, a female Gothic classic set in a sinister Italian castle, emphasizing suspense and the sublime. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. While romantic, it uses Gothic tropes, the monstrous, the sublime. It's a key part of the genre's legacy. The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. American Gothic, focusing on psychological decay, family curses, and macabre settings. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, a literary masterpiece that uses the Gothic mode, a haunted manor, passionate ghosts, a Byronic hero, to explore themes of love and revenge. The Mark of the Beast by Rudyard Kipling. It was called a superb instance of quasi-paranoia that saturates the colonial Gothic. Lord Arthur Saville's Crime by Oscar Wilde, England's most notorious decadent, arrested for acts of gross indecency with other men, 8 years after publishing this book, having the court use these books as evidence of his prosecution. The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, an intense tale about an elusive and monstrous woman, the pagan gods not being dead, but returning to topple science with superstition and modern man with beasts from before civilization. Dracula by the Irishman Bram Stoker. It codified the modern vampire mythos, masterfully weaving ancient Transylvanian superstition with contemporary anxieties into a chilling tale of primal fear. Other notable Gothic revival artifacts: Pugin's design for metalwork and furniture, Gothic revival stained glass. There was a massive revival of stained glass making for the thousands of new churches, with artisan firms like Clayton and Bell producing them. Chapter 5, the 80s. First of all, people considered the horror boom of the 70s to inspire the third wave of Gothic art, a whole new movement to be born again from the ashes in the form of a subculture. Only this time we have a new medium, film. There were a lot of Gothic horror D-list movies made in Hollywood in the 20th century. The arts, starting with music. As I said before, the 20th century was the first time we have evidence of recorded Gothic music in history. So, while having no reference to pull from, where did the term come from in music? Since there was nothing we could point at so far and say, ha, this is Gothic music right here. In 1967, music critic John Stickney first described the band The Doors as Gothic rock, connecting the literary and atmospheric themes to music for the first time. Of course, The Doors being Gothic is debatable, but this was just the first time it was recorded in reference to musicians. The famous London nightclub The Batcave, opened in 1982, became the central meeting point for the scene, which was briefly called positive punk before the term goth was widely adopted by the media in 1983. Here are some proto-goth precursor songs. 1956, I Put a Spell on You by Screaming Jay Hawkins. It was a strong thematic influence. It pioneered horror as theater and music with macabre imagery and theatrical stage show, Rising from a Coffin. In my opinion, this song is 4 out of 5 scary gargoyles. 1967, All Tomorrow's Party by The Velvet Underground and Nico. This was a masterpiece in atmosphere, and it featured Nico's cello-like deep vocals and the band's droning melancholic sound. 2 out of 5. 1979, Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus, often cited as the first genuine Gothic record. It was a debut single, and it defined the genre's sound and aesthetic: cutting guitars, tribal drums, deep vocals, macabre theatrics. 3 out of 5. let's get into proper 80s goth music. But first, I want to extend a special shout out to Miss Diamanda Galas, who has kept releasing amazing gothic music since the 80s consistently. She did not appear in any of my searches today, but I remember her from back when I was a baby goth, and her discography was very vast. Here we can see that she also wrote books. For me, she is definitely the biggest icon of the 20th century Gothic. Other music, I've taken the liberty of curating this list as some music marketed as goth I found either not goth, too bad to feature, or not goth and too bad to feature at the same time. 1981, Susie and the Banshees, Spellbound. I will give this one 5 scary gargoyles. 1982, The Cure, Hanging Garden. 1 out of 5. 1985, The Cult, She Sells Sanctuary. Again 1 out of 5. The Sisters of Mercy, Marian. 3 out of 5. And Black Planet. 4 out of 5. 1988, Fields of the Nephilim, Moonchild. 2 out of 5. The subjects of Gothic music are inspired by Gothic literature: nihilism, dark romanticism, poetry, and tragedy. They emphasize minor chords, reverb, and melancholic melodies. I must give credit to Deltaworks' show Very Delta for inspiring me to look into this angle with her argument that Halloween music is not being released anymore. I will link her video in the description below. Because so many Halloween and Gothic tropes coincide, I went ahead and made a graph of Halloween music releases compared to Gothic music releases. I looked at Discogs results when you search for both words, and they have this nice little graph here called Decade in the filtering bar, which tells you how many releases there were per decade. As you can see, Delta was very right to observe a sharp decline in Halloween music, and there is definitely a link between Halloween trends and Gothic trends. But I was expecting the peak of Halloween music to be in the 80s. Delta was saying it was in the 50s, but it appears to be actually in the 2010s. I find this so interesting. Visual art. My favorite example is The Dream Keeper by Bob Carlos Clark, a heliogravure from the 1980s. Tim Burton released Vincent, the stop motion. It's an early example of his signature style, reflecting influences from German Expressionism and classic horror. He released the Beetlejuice film in the 80s. The character Lydia Dietz, with her all-black clothing and pale skin, became an iconic and affirming Gothic image for the subculture. Another artist is Patricia Hurl, painting loose, wispy, and dissolving forms, such as the Irish Gothic living room, reimagines Grant Wood's American Gothic to reflect the repressed anxieties and strict social conventions of 1980s Ireland. Another one is Madonna, Irish Gothic 2, presents the mother and child as a far cry from the reverential or divine, challenging traditional religious iconography. Floria Sigismondi, her photography is imbued with a dark and ethereal aesthetic, exploring themes of identity, transformation, and the enigmatic aspects of the human psyche. Dave McKean creates multimedia compositions that blend photography, painting, and digital manipulation to explore psychological states and dream logic. Sculpture. Gothic 2 by Lucien Denarend from 1981. In my opinion, this is not Gothic. We also have Raymond Mason with Grape Pickers, a monumental work noted for its expressiveness and rejection of purely formalistic cool art conventions. Architecture, only keeping the one we already have, studying it, visiting it as tourists. Fashion. The fashion of this era was a DIY blend of punk and Victorian influences. The Gothic look found early mainstream expression in characters like the cartoon and later TV series The Addams Family starting from 1938 onward, and the Munsters from 1964, whose style was directly inspired by Victorian mourning attire. Colors, besides black, they wore red, deep purple, and royal blue. The silhouette was A-line, peplum with layering, thick black jeans. The fabrics were shiny vinyl, PVC, leather, latex, lace, fishnets, velvet, tulle, brocade, and distressed fabric. The shoes were pointed toe winkle pickers, creepers, military-style boots such as Doc Martens, high-heeled ankle boots. The hair was big, teased, with a widow's peak sometimes, asymmetrical cuts, shaved sections, colors standard blue-black or natural bright colors such as pillar box red or platinum white. The makeup was inspired by film stars, vampires, and glam rock. They wore heavy dark eyeliner, winged black or colored eyeshadow. Lipstick was dark red or black, and a stark white matte face. As for accessories, they wore religious iconography, silver-toned metal, fingerless gloves, and spikes. Style icons. We have already mentioned a bunch of them in the music and fashion sections, but there's also Robert Smith, Bela Lugosi, Betty Page, Winona Ryder, Vampira, Morticia Adams, played by Carolyn Jones in 1964, Nico, and David Bowie. As for writing, Stephen King published in the 1980s Pet Sematary, where the evil kitties come to... Actually, I'm not gonna spoil it. Cycle of the Werewolf, The Eyes of the Dragon, Skeleton Crew, Misery, and It. James Herbert published in the 80s Haunted and Shrine. There was the Zebra Gothics line. Some interesting titles include The Jeweled Heart of Rosemont Castle, Heath Hallows, Mistress of Falcon Court, The Shifting Shadows of Moongate, The House of Shadowed Roses. In the meantime, in the 90s, the goth subculture diversified stylistically and gained wider visibility. For its fashion evolution, the 90s moved beyond the 80s trad goth style. This decade also saw a rise of distinct substyles like romantic goth and Victorian goth, which drew heavily from historical fashion, incorporating lace, velvet, corsets, and flowing skirts for a more elegant and ornate look. There was a fashion magazine called Gothic Beauty releasing numbers. While the underground scene persisted, a more accessible version of goth culture entered the mainstream. This was evident in the popularity of Tim Burton's films like Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands, which presented a quirky, stylized form of gothic aesthetics to a mass audience. The 2000s was a period marked by even more fragmentation. New subgenres emerged, and the subculture interacted with other musical styles. The early mid-2000s saw a fascinating blend of gothic rock and heavy metal with bands like Evanescence, Nightwish, Blue Tangle, Him, and Lacuna Coil. This era was also the last major mainstream wave of edgy, gothic vampire media before the Twilight series shifted the tone. Before Twilight released in 2009, we used to share DVDs in high schools with compilations of vampire films such as Lost Boys 87, Interview with a Vampire 94, adapted from the Anne Rice book, Buffy the Vampire Slayer 97, Queen of the Damned 2002, an Anne Rice classic. I loved seeing how extensive her bibliography is, look at it. Back to our list of films, Underworld 2003, Van Helsing and Blade Trinity in 2004, and Ultraviolet 2006. Chapter 7. We have gotten to the present day. In conclusion, what is the Gothic culture today? The historical people. They are assimilated into other populations in Southern and Eastern Europe since centuries ago. No distinct group exists today. Music, let's talk about actual, in my opinion, officially Gothic music in 2025. Cemetery S, Leviathan. This is a young Washington, D.C. band creating a sound rooted in the classic Batcave club of the 80s. 3 out of 5. Ashes and Diamonds Are Forever album. It's their debut album, described as swaggering, seductive, and haunted. 1 out of 5. Paradise Lost Ascension album. 4 out of 5. Mal di Luna, the postmodern Gothic album. They're an Italian band and this is their debut album. It fuses classic Gothic rock with modern experimental elements. 3 out of 5. Let's talk about the Lady Gaga situation. Unfortunately, even though she has Gothic fashion on point in her Mayhem era 2025, the music on the Mayhem album does not sound Gothic, but rather disco. Lady Gaga actually did release in the past music that sounds Gothic to me, for example, Electric Chapel, Bloody Mary, Judas, Monster, Bad Romance, especially the intro jingle of it, and Heavy Metal Lover. All of these Lady Gaga songs are 5 out of 5 gargoyles in my heart. I made a playlist with all these songs in chronological order and it's linked in the description. Visual arts, this is what serious museums and galleries consider to be Gothic right now, the Gothic Modern Exhibition touring Europe, and the Tropical Gothic Exhibition in Canada. Let's not talk about contemporary high art at this time. But of course, art is not only for the famous galleries, art is free and anyone can do it at home on their own. Here are many great Gothic artists I've found online. Social media is full of great examples of new goth artists. Here is what can be found on Tumblr at a first glance. Now, I want to feature 2 of my favorite goth artists on Instagram. Rosie Moon Creations. She curates fantastic historical artifacts on her Tumblr, but she is also a great example of naturally intelligent art. Mervey Star, a dark and gloomy makeup artist that frequently travels through Eastern Europe. Sculpture. I found this amazing sculptor on Instagram, Joy Mercy. Then there's Tracery by Timothy Cleary from 2016. Distillay's Skull by Esther Magnusson, and The Vase by Nicolette Johnson. On Pinterest, we can find many goth artists, usually selling their creations on Etsy, so if you are able, please go and support these great contemporary artists. I would look on Etsy.com. There are some good examples there, but unfortunately, most of Etsy.com right now is Temu resellers. Nevertheless, Gothic sculptures are prevalent in the mass market now, most of the times not knowing the original artist behind it. Architecture-wise, new buildings and monuments are no longer built in the original style, but it survives through restoration and study. The last remaining original Gothic buildings are from the 16th century, and the Neo-Gothic or revival ones are from the 19th century. In fashion, there is a mainstream resurgence. The quote goth girl era is embraced by celebrities and fashion media. The trend is called Gothic Renaissance in the fashion world, and it includes corsets, lace, velvet, high collars, maxi skirts, chokers, and the coffin nail shape. Here are some key designers. Rick Owens, the perennial king of dark, architectural and glamour grunge aesthetics. Alexander McQueen under Sarah Burton continues the house's legacy of dramatic, romantic, and historically inspired darkness. Comme des Garçons with Yohji Yamamoto, masters of avant-garde, deconstructed black garments. There is still a passion for divergence into multiple genres or boxes in which people love to put themselves into. Genre titles are being invented every TikTok trend cycle, such as trad goth, where the 80s old school goth look is making a massive revival, dark academia, romantic goth, cyber goth, southern goth, western goth, midwest goth, New England goth, suburban gothic. I'm starting to feel like people are just trying to use the label as a symbol of where they live within America. They say that these include prairie dresses, fringe jackets, high neck blouses, cowboy boots, and heavy buckles. In my opinion, cowboy boots, denim, and prairie aesthetics are not gothic. Corporate gothic, no comment. There are some that don't make a lot of sense to me personally, such as health goth, clean goth. At this point, I feel like we are just effing around with words. In 2022, the term whimsy goth appeared as one of the most recent additions to the list of genres. It fuses dark romanticism from traditional goth with ethereal fantasy, blending vintage lace, celestial motifs, and mystical symbols into an aesthetic of playful, otherworldly melancholy. I mean, on the aesthetics wiki, when you search goth, you get about 300 results. In writing, the literature is ongoing, the classic works remain influential, and new stories are published in the genre. Modern authors that are writing within the tradition are Silvia Moreno Garcia, a Mexican Gothic, and Aliette de Bodard that wrote The House of Shattered Wings. Here are some recent Gothic books: The Bog Wife by Kay Cronister, King Nix by Kristen Bakis, Lady Macbeth by Ava Reed, Sacrificial Animals by Kaylee Peterson, This Cursed House by Del Sandin. As a bonus, I found that there is a World Goth Day global celebration on May 22nd with club nights, clothes swaps, and community events, especially in Europe. Chapter 8, The Conclusion. I made this graph about the evolution of the arts as time went by from the 2nd century until now. The last data here is in music because of the absence of recording methods, but also the lack of writings describing it in history. Paintings because they may have existed but were not made on mediums that last for more than 1,000 years. Architecture, since the revival era became very absent unfortunately, people still choose to construct their personal houses in any way they want, so some choose the Gothic aesthetic, while some buy an old house and refurbish it, which is fabulous. Here is another version with the same data but the correct distances in time to show how much time has passed since antiquity until the modern era. Thank you for watching my indie documentary. I think it's fascinating to look at how this culture has survived and transformed for so many centuries. See you in the next one.